Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins, and I'm delighted to be joined by Mel McVeigh. Mel is the Vice President of Product, Commerce and Consumer Brands at Condé Nast, a brand that I'm sure is well known and an organization that is well known to a lot of our listeners. You're very welcome today, Mel.
Yep, lovely to be here.
Thank you. Let's get on to the show because I've got a lot of questions I want to fire at you, and I'm sure we'll get into some interesting discussions on today's episode. So first of all, I'd like to start by thanking you for delivering a very inspiring and inspirational keynote speech, which you did at the recent Think Global Forum Summit Week. It was the first time we'd ever done a Think Global Forum over the course of a week, of course, online, in a digital environment because of the pandemic. But could you maybe start, if you don't mind, by sharing a little bit more about your motivations, what drove you to speak about your keynote topic, which was this strategy by making puzzles, if I remember correctly, explored as a mystery, which was quite an interesting subject topic for a summit week.
Yeah, so I think that something that has fascinated me for a while in product is how you solve the problems of, I suppose, design, product, implementation, and technology. It actually, that idea, it's obviously not mine, came from a book that I read called Curious by Ian Leslie, The Desire to Know and Why Your Future Depends on It. And it had a really interesting thesis about the role of curiosity. And that, you know, as we're children and as we grow up, there are different types. I can't profess to remember what they were, but ultimately it talked about that concept, right? And I think for me, it was a massive light bulb moment in terms of how I could frame the work that we do or the work that I've done around those two ideas, because they're ultimately fundamentally different things. And a lot of people I find in the technology space try and solve all problems as puzzles, right? Everything is a backlog, a roadmap, a series of steps. You piece it all together and ta-da, you have this amazing product. However, I also come from a background of creativity, trained in photography and as an artist. And one of the things that you are taught at art school is to explore all ideas before making an answer. And so that element of curiosity that allows you to explore is very much a practice that I think we can do better at. And that's why, you know, why I love my job, because the intersection of creativity and delivery is at the heart of what we do. And if you don't think like an artist and break the rules, it's really hard to do innovation. And all the biggest innovators, Netflix, Disney, have to actually work at that intersection.
No, that's fascinating stuff, because I suppose it's that technical approach versus the creative approach and the marrying of the two. And I know you speak on a number of these issues, like you've touched on creativity, strategy, photography, AI. So maybe could you maybe just unpack a little bit more the intersection of that and how you think about those? Because I know you've delivered some very informative discussions around those topics.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like having, I don't know, two brains, two minds, two ways of looking, you know, at a coin, or whatever analogy you want to use. I think that, you know, we actually had a discussion about it the other day around some of the things we're releasing in the next couple of weeks, which is when you're a creative and as you think about the things you're trying to do, you don't really start with a blank canvas. If you think about how even films or photographs are made, they often start with a sketch or a flat plan. They then get a storyboard. And so the story comes to life over time. You build it up. It's kind of the where prototyping kind of, you know, philosophy probably comes from as well. And in that context, you're not worried about deliverables or outcomes or revenue, but you are allowing your brain to put disconnected joint dots together. That is the beauty of, I think, of a really good strategy of taking the seemingly disconnected and making it into a story, as well as a vision that people, you know, buy into. On the other side is the delivery. You know, part of my career, and I jump every time. Like one job, you know, I spent a lot of my early career as a program manager and a product manager. You know, that is all about structure. It is about frameworks. It's about tasks. It's about to-do lists. And you need that to do creativity. If you don't have that foundation, then everything is just pure chaos. And I think that while it's fundamentally important, and if you work with any engineers and they need structure, they need a brief. The really sort of good ones are the ones that can do a little bit of both, that kind of happy tension between when to break the rules and when not to. And I think that the reason I talk about those two is I've personally, I think I've had a love-hate relationship with product management, because it has anchored so much into transactional. It has anchored so much into frameworks and a series of tasks that are repeatable. Our designs have become generic because we need to have systems design, that we've lost the essence of creativity, right? And if you think about, that might have worked in the last 10 years as technology and the internet kind of grew, but in the world today, all the things that are exploding is content, storytelling, visual, TikTok, right, Netflix, like these things start with really nebulous ideas. You know, it comes out of a writer's brain or an artist's brain. Product people and technology people need to get more. If we need to understand our customer and understand our user, you also have to understand, certainly in my world, the mind of the creator.
No, it kind of made me think a little bit, Mel, as you were speaking there, about the technology challenge. You know, you think of some of the large technology companies or some of the brands that you've mentioned, and they're scaling exponentially even during a pandemic. You know, we're seeing huge growth in sectors where I think at the start of the pandemic, maybe a lot of people thought that businesses, and some businesses have really struggled. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that some people haven't really suffered, and of course the tragic backdrop to people who are no longer with us. In the area of business, though, it's hard not to recognize that a lot of the brands have actually done better. A lot, particularly in the technology sector, they're actually doing better than they've ever done, which is quite surprising to maybe some of our thought processes a year and a half ago. And they have to scale, don't they, on an international level? And maybe it is a different discipline. You've talked about the people that can balance both the technology side and the creative side. A real sort of linchpins, almost, if I can borrow a phrase from Seth Godin. They're kind of like the linchpins that can really help an organization. But it's not easy, is it? Bringing together that creativity and that scalability that technology and sort of that problem solving methodology requires.
Yeah, and you need to make space for both. When thinking about that, I have some colleagues that work at Adidas, right? And they created an incredible campaign at the beginning of the pandemic called Home Team, right? About how, exercise and kind of connectivity and all great creative is just really good storytelling, whether it's a social campaign or a blockbuster film, right? It's an ability to tell stories at so many different levels: visual, audio, narrative, and the arcs. And going back to the mysteries and puzzles, a really good film is a mystery, right? You just don't know. Gosh, I started watching The Mayor of Easttown last night. Every time you think you know something else happens, right? If a story was just a puzzle, it'd be boring, right? Because you just know the pieces that are going to come. But I do believe that, Adidas had a huge year also financially, revenue-wise. They're ultimately selling products, right? And I know, like, no matter what any company says about digital transformation, there is always legacy technology. There is always a rubric of things that you need to unpack. But certainly from a scale perspective, the brands that have done it well understand their framework of technology at scale, right? Because Netflix is actually only one product in every market with the same feature set. It's not actually a complex product. It's actually quite a simple product. What is complex is the content that is inside it. And you can, if you're a legacy company like Condé, you've got the opposite problem, which is everything is complex. So before you can get to creativity, you have to solve the complexity first at a pure technology level, right?
No, agreed. And so we kind of started off talking around sort of speaking on some of these topics. But I know at Condé Nast, just to bring that back in a little bit, you've been extremely busy working on this, am I right, this September digital global issue, which is a big deal for Condé Nast, and I'm sure for everybody who's involved in this. I suppose what is a true collaboration, isn't it? I mean, it's a good example of creative and technology coming together. maybe you could expand a little bit on this intersection of the art and the technology that's been involved at Condé, because I know that's something that's kind of hot off the press, isn't it?
Well, it almost like technically will be launched in a couple of hours. And so,
Wow.
you know, the time that this is, you know, like released, I suppose, who knows what the feedback will be. But so if I, you know, for anyone kind of, I don't know, listening and stuff, think of, you know, I'm saying this pre-knowing what's about to happen. So in the context of, you know, maybe just before I start on the September issue, you know, the role that I have is global, and we are going through a huge transformation. We did, up until a year ago, we were 12 companies, right? So therefore 12 strategies, 12 product portfolios, everything. And in the context of any of our brands, so I work across most of our global brands, so brands that have footprints in multiple markets. Condé is a mixture of brands like the New Yorker. While it's a global brand, it really is, I mean, it's the New Yorker. The teams are in New York. I mean, everything about it is about the identity of New York. And Vogue is the complete opposite. It's in 26 markets. I mean, it's the full depth and breadth of fashion and culture and media. And its beauty is in that legacy of, you identify Vogue by its territory. British Vogue has a different identity to American Vogue, right? You know the if you're in that world, you know Edward, you know Anna, you know, you don't actually personally know them, but you're on a first, you know, you understand the role of the editor in relation to the Italian Vogue. I mean, this brand has history, you know, over 100 years, and has the ability to like break the internet, even with old school legacy kind of visuals and storytelling. And I think that one of the opportunities, so in the, you know, in the next couple of hours, the first global September issue will be launched. So again, if you work in fashion, you know, it's the absolute, you know, staple book in the US. The Devil Wears Prada is kind of based on it. There's documentaries about it. It's often our biggest book, and it's the first time a version of it will be online. Every market has contributed, so it's a truly global collaboration. And from a technology perspective, you know, I can remember, you know, our first meeting where we were like, how are we going to do this, right? Like, and can we? We had actually a very, very short window. But without kind of giving too much away, the beauty of the collaboration was that product design and engineering with editorial were there from the beginning. And what I mean, I'm super proud of it in terms of what the team created. I can't take any kind of credit for it because it's the teams on the ground that have pulled it together. But it does go back to that delivery and creativity. And in simple terms, we actually made it before we produced it, if that makes sense. So normally what tends to happen, say in a creative and a product world, is the creatives go do all the work and then they give you all the assets and go stitch it all together. And then product and engineering go, yeah, but this doesn't work and the ratio is not right. And I have to, and then they're up all night, you know, trying to find solutions to problems that if they had just been mapped out in the beginning would have been fine. So I'll give you the most simple one, an illustration, because as a photographic geek, I'm super proud of this, which was in the beginning of the brief, as you can imagine, it needs to work on mobile and desktop. And the ratios visually are different. One is landscape and one is portrait. And so if you don't plan that properly from a production perspective, you could end up having really tiny videos on your mobile that aren't mobile friendly. And the majority of our traffic is on mobile. And so part of the creative brief to the photographers and the videographers was that they needed to be able to shoot so that in the editing process, we could edit both ways. So it is only one film. I mean, there are multiple films, right? But there is only one creation of that film, right? But the way that they produced it allowed us in the editing process to create a portrait version and a landscape version. It also then was an extension. We have our own video player. The video teams then had to create 2 players. But in simple terms, from a consumer perspective, what you will see on the desktop and on the mobile is exactly the same assets, but they're designed for the device. Now, if we had not been involved in that creative briefing, that would never have happened, right? So I know it sounds little and technical, but if you think about it in a world of multimedia, you actually need engineering in the room from the beginning. So we prototyped it, we mocked it up, we, you know, showcased like a film, right? It started as a sketch, it then became a storyboard, it then became a prototype with fake assets, and then it became a real thing, rather than, okay, technology, here's everything, you got 2 weeks, or in fact, we're so late, you've got 3 days, do it. And they've been tweaking. I mean, I can know the teams have been up most of the last couple of nights, because they've also wanted to add things, and I haven't actually seen the final cut. But the thing about the intersection of creativity and delivery, we don't make transactional products. Our product is not Deliveroo. Our product is not, Uber Eats. Our product is not Uber, right? It isn't about getting you from A to B. It's about storytelling. And to do true storytelling, we need to be in the room with the editorial team. That's my long answer. I'm super proud of this project, and I'm really proud that our product design and engineering has really worked together with the edit and creative to make this, which I hope is well received. September issue across the globe in every language. It's on every website. It's huge.
It's a huge deal, isn't it, for the Condé Nast stable to produce something that has, what did you say, over 100 years of tradition in Vogue alone?
Yeah.
And you mentioned like the New Yorker and Vogue, and these are the very top draw. I mean, these are sort of the magazines, the print, the content, and the storytelling that you would consider first class publications globally. So it's also a huge change, isn't it? And I can imagine there's been a few creative tensions between the various global editors. Maybe that's not something you can talk about, but
No, it's kind of not. I think that everyone's really cognizant of the transitions we need to make. Our conversations are now global. It doesn't matter whether you're a K star in Korea or whether you're Billie Eilish in the US. You have resonance to a global audience. I think that, and the words that you use, right? Publication, magazine. We are a heritage print company. I mean, that is our mindset. Yeah. But I feel that I'll reframe it another way in terms of the way that we hire, right? Rather than say, there's always creative tension. You don't get good creativity without tension. But it's really interesting when you meet, again, product designers and engineering. I've also worked on a lot of travel. It was always a universal question in a job interview, like, what do you like about travel? Or what do you like about our brands? For me, it doesn't matter how good you are at your craft. If you can't talk about our product, then you're not going to help us do amazing things, right? I've had many interviews recently where people go, I don't read any of your mags, or I don't look at your content. And I'm like, but they go, but I have a framework, I know how to do user journeys. And I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't help me, right? Because our product is our content. Our product is what you say, we're first class. And our job in product and design is to take that heritage of print and translate a version of that online, right? When you do that, you actually have full buy-in with the editors. If you talk their language, no different to talking to your users. And so in that context, we've had great creative conversations about how you do something or how you film. And all those media, players, we do. A lot of our work now is video. It's photographic. It's audio. It isn't words. New Yorker is more words. But Vanity Fair, I mean, these brands drive and thrive on visual culture. I mean, Vanity Fair, Annie Leibovitz, you talk about, photography and the role that it has. This isn't about flows and putting products, but it is sometimes putting products in a basket. It's a really different paradigm.
Yeah, I think last time we spoke, and maybe you could give me a quick update on this, but I think it was the Traveller side of things that was doing surprisingly well, even though people weren't doing international travel. Is that still the case? And
yeah,
that's a very visual medium, isn't it? There's a lot of photography, a lot of video in sort of the Traveller side of things, isn't there?
Yeah, it's one of our highest performing stable brands at the moment. I mean, travel is recovering.
Yeah.
So it's a slightly different paradigm. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting for our brands, the ones that were very lended towards at-home activities, so like Bon Appetit or even Vanity Fair and Wired had huge growth last year. Obviously a bit of a plateau now when everyone wants to be inside. But Traveller had a really terrible early start, as you can imagine, because everyone was, there's a whole, I mean, that year is so interesting if you reflect on it and you've been lucky to have an okay experience. But I think that in that context, it's again the tension between anything about intuition and then data. We use data a lot to kind of track our trends. So we were able to spot trends and then pivoted our content strategy. And then a lot of it comes down to intuition. If you work in travel, you can kind of smell the recovery, if that makes sense. So it goes back to, in my world with my teams, is you've got to really understand your product and the market. And travel did operate like any country, the moment people could get outside, the first thing they did was get in their cars or get on a train. They're not flying, they're not leaving their country, but travel didn't really stop. Just where you went to changed, and it became hyper local. Now it's becoming regional, and then like last recovery will be international. But America's booming. Mexico's back to pre-pandemic levels of travel. And that is partly because, even though in the UK, as of yesterday, it's on the red list, as a country, it's got back to pre-COVID levels due to the fact that Americans go there. So this is a bit about, if you understand your sector, any sector, you can see the green shoots of recovery potentially before someone else.
No, that's very interesting. I was actually speaking only this week to the manager of Visit Sweden, just as a side note. And it was interesting how, they were an organization that had to attract international visitors to Sweden, obviously, but had to completely pivot their strategy, full digital transformation, start talking about staycations overnight. And they came up with two great campaigns. One was called The Drinkable Country and one was called The Edible Country, where they set up these tables in nature all around the country and in the cities to really encourage their own citizens to go out and explore. And I think it spoke to me anyway when I was talking to Ruth Dollar from Visit Sweden recently that, people have been forced to think, haven't they, in a digital global manner. And maybe your core audience has had to change overnight almost in some cases. But you're right, that international travel is coming back. And, we're all watching the changes on a daily basis as to the different rules and regulations, depending on which part of the world it is. But I found it fascinating that the Traveller magazine was doing exceptionally well. And as you say, it continues to outperform, which is, it's interesting. I did hear many moons ago, and I don't know whether it still holds true today, but that in the print magazine, sort of the non-digital world many years ago, they were kind of these luxuries that you stuck with. So even during times of recession, you felt like treating yourself to a really nice magazine, something about cracking the spine, the smell of the print, the feel, the texture, that experience of just looking after yourself for what isn't a huge amount of money to people to have that luxury. And I'm just wondering how that translates into a digital world now,
That is a current kind of existential question, if I'm actually truly honest, and goes back to when you talk about like art and creativity and then delivery. How do you translate that feeling online? Because it's a different consumption experience. I have that conversation a lot with sort of people in the photographic industry about photo books, right? And the like how you open, read, and consume a book in paper form and holding it, magazine, etc., is a really different experience. I mean, I still have friends that subscribe to the New Yorker and reserve time on a Saturday to just read it in a park. Like there's a ritual that exists. Now that isn't the same when you've got it on your online and it's streaming. I think for people within our kind of sector and industry, and certainly mine, need to think about those new challenges in a different way. So the desire to consume content about fashion, understanding about fashion. Maybe I'll use the one that really interested me this year was around how the big fashion houses applied their fashion shows. Because normally it was traditional catwalk. You went to Paris and you went to Milan and you kind of went around and it was all recorded. It's not an area I'm fully immersed in, but, getting snippets. But, this year in the last season, a lot of it was digital. It had VR and AR. It was live streamed and it had a mixture of like 3D, AR. So creatives just adapt. I mean, this is the beauty about coming from a creative background or a background where change doesn't frighten you, that you just adapt, right? And if there is any one positive outcome of the pandemic, is that it forced people who may have been a bit slow to change their behavior to do it. Like it's again that narrative of, oh no, in business we can't work from home, we won't be productive, it's impossible, and so forth. Well, now most companies are keeping remote policies and allowing their staff. Sometimes it creates a bit of a break to kind of make you rethink how something needs to be done, right? Same with print to digital, right? We just need to think slightly back to the history. but think of like I said, with the September issue, think of the device. In print, you think about the paper, the color, the print. In digital, I think about the device. I think about the scale. I think about the screen.
100%. So I wanted to touch on as well, because we've spoke a lot about sort of the creative requirements in this sort of digital transformation. And I know that a little while back you were a director or co-director at She Says, weren't you?
Yeah.
And She Says was very much, it is very much about promoting and inspiring women to take up careers within the creative industry. I'm just wondering on your thoughts on that now, as you're sort of really engaged in the digital world now, and the creativity and the technologies blurring from your sort of She Says experiences.
Are you meaning in the relationship of diversity in the sector at the moment, or women in media?
I'm just wondering, because I know that promoting people in the industry, particularly in the creative industry, and when you think about the technology industry, I think that what I'm trying to say is that technology historically has been quite a male engineering focus. Not always, but in a lot of cases, you often hear people talking about the male dominance, and particularly with Silicon Valley companies, for example, people designing products on an international scale. There has been, and maybe still is in some areas, a lack of diversity and inclusion, which ultimately impacts the creativity and the global scale of some products potentially.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not going to say that. It's hard because I'm older, right? I mean, part of the reason for She Says for me was I moved to the UK and didn't have a network, and so it was one of the best ways for me before I really got involved. And I'm always one of those people that go, how can I help? It was a really small kind of organization, and then we kind of grew it. So it was both part a way for me to meet people, but also just do something within the digital sector in the UK. And I've made my best friend in the UK I met, through She Says. And it is fascinating now. Look, it's 12 years ago, right? And I did it for 5 years. It's a decade ago in terms of even my life and where I was back then. I don't feel that all the questions have been resolved. I think that how do I put it? In the last 10 years, there's been a massive transformation, right, in terms of women in industry, both technology and media, and growth. Still really small proportion. I think that, but the kind of journey isn't over. And I'll say it in the context of, I'll say Condé, right? We're a global company, 6,000 people, and I feel very proud of the fact that certainly in my team, we are a mixture of cultures, languages, diversity in terms of, even our belief systems and so forth. That being said, hiring can be really hard, right? We still probably anchor from a gender perspective to being more male. And we are relentless. And I think that, and I talk about this a lot with my teams, we have kind of women's networks, and non-binary and so forth within Condé. Now also when I look back and see younger women, half the time it's just confidence, right? You can see a really big distinction in leadership and kind of propensity to just kind of put your hat in the ring. So I try and do a lot of work more internally now rather than say in an industry, but it's something that I think about actually more and more, because it's our role, or my role as the leader with our team, to just, it's not even a negotiable topic, but it isn't in our world. Like, we talk about it all the time, D&I, and we have our own diversity officer at Condé, and a thing that really matters to me is all the perspectives, and the one that I want to champion more and more is a really global one, right? We have there are challenges. There's always some part of the diversity spectrum that may not be working. I'm not sure you're going to be able to answer every box at every time, but as long as you're across it, and you can kind of report on it and feel confident that you're doing the right things, and as a result, you actually then build a better culture. Like, goes back to, I'll use Netflix again, because is that, Netflix, still one platform and one technology, but, some of its biggest shows in the last year, have been Spanish globally, right? Have been French. And I'm sure some research would have said that, oh, no one watches, subtitles. And what we had was it last year? The best film, not foreign language film, was a Korean film. that shows that the world is changing, right? There's a propensity. I think I'm going to be awful, I can't remember the director's name, but said in the speech that, like, you know, just reading, you know, that 2 inches above the screen isn't a blocker for people to consuming content that isn't coming out of Hollywood, right? So I think that we've come far, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, no, you mentioned the word confidence there a moment ago, and I was talking to Tammy Darcy, who she's a founder of something called the Shona Project in Ireland, and it was really something that came out of working with young women and giving them role models and sharing successful people to help build some of that confidence. And she's been on sort of national television in Ireland, and she's built a very successful organization helping people between the age of 13 and 15. Really a lot of focus on schools and confidence and role models and experience. And it was amazing talking to Tammy, the founder of the Shona Project, about how important that was, particularly now more than ever. So to some degree, you think we've come a long way. You're talking about it was sort of a decade ago when you got involved, but there are still glaring gaps in lots of areas that we're still working on. I think it's better, but there's a lot more work to do, isn't there?
Yeah, but I mean, I'm a bit older now, right? But there are kind of waves, particularly in a sort of female context, that are questions or that you ask yourself that I think is very much towards that, you know, femininity kind of paradigm that doesn't really exist in the context of, you know, other genders, right? But the confidence thing still exists. I mean, I see it with our teams all the time, but the role modeling then becomes from the leaders about setting tones of behavior, right? And setting tones of expectations of how you operate. And, you know, I have been in some very aggressive cultures at different organizations, and also incredibly inclusive. And so it kind of comes in, you know, we used to say this that she says, you know, you can't change what you can't see. So if you are visible and there are other, you know, role models that are visible, then, you know, it basically helps change. You know, you might not actually see the winds of change until kind of over time. And it's not like, oh, today we're doing this and then tomorrow something else. Sometimes it's quite subtle. And, you know, our majority of our leadership at Condé globally is female, right? Our CEO is male, but our creative officer is female. Our CMO is female. Our head of commercial is female. Our head of video is female. Like, we do have an incredibly and diverse, right? So I'm very proud to be an organization that has female women in leadership, particularly given that the majority of our staff, not in technology, I think we've got work to do, but Condé as a company, you know, has an element of balance.
Yeah. No, so important, and particularly what you were talking about, subtitles and you know, Netflix, and it's not a barrier. And I find myself now, the content I consume is international in nature more and more than, say, when I was growing up. You know, it was very sort of, you sort of were in your little media bubble, your little country bubble. Yes. But because of technology, because of the various screens that you're talking about, that you now have to really be cognizant of with your Condé Nast publications in a digital format, we're all carrying around these little TV screens in our pocket, aren't we? So
you might not be able to travel, but technology is borderless, right? Yeah, TikTok, yeah. Facebook. It's more the legacy kind of publications that kind of struggle, or even rights management. You know, it's TV is still very territorial, but. And I mean, I have to face that every day. If I want to watch or look at anything in Australia versus the UK, currently in Spain or in America, you know, I have to navigate.
Yeah. Licensing is still a big. Yeah, licensing is still a big part of it, isn't it? Yeah. The Olympics, I suppose, that's very current at the moment, is a great example in terms of their media and how that's broadcast around the world. So, So in terms of Condé Nast, then, can I just maybe ask you, because obviously we know each other a little bit at this stage, but there's maybe some of our listeners that would maybe be interested to understand a little bit about your own journey to Condé Nast, a little bit about what you do in Condé Nast and sort of the areas of responsibility, because we've been talking about this digital issue, but I know there's a whole world of Condé Nast behind the scenes, and I know you're very passionate about your photography, and you kind of, we sort of spoke about that last time, and maybe just share a little bit about your own story, your own journey, and what sort of you're involved in Condé Nast, as best you can. I'm sure there's a lot there.
I was thinking which way to start, from the beginning or the end of the story. I'll start from the end. So my role at the moment is VP of product. So what that entails is I look after 6 brands. Majority of them are the global brands. So that is Vogue, GQ, Condé Nast Traveller, Architectural Digest, Allure, and Glamour. We are 18 brands globally in 12 markets. So largest market is the US, majority are in Europe, so France, Spain, Italy. We're also in Russia and China. We have a variety of licensee kind of markets as well. So Australia is a licensee market. We're about 6,000 employees, right, across the globe, working across those titles. I describe it often as like it's almost like working at little mini companies, because the personality and the kind of culture inside GQ is really different to the personality. There's a lot of centralized services, but the editorial teams and obviously what they do is different. So you kind of have to know, oh, I'm in a GQ meeting, or I'm in a, in a Vogue meeting. So it's quite a stretch. In my sort of ecosystem, I have about 22 product managers, but I look after the portfolio of product design and engineering. So that's about 110 people that is managing those 6 brands across. 5 of them are in multiple markets, Vogue being the largest. We have 2 other portfolios for the brands. So one's actually before it's a really complex, but it's like I look after a series of brands on the consumer side. I'm also responsible for a technology, which is commerce, and that is partly due to my background. And we have 3, commercial being ad tech, 1 being subscriptions and membership, and being commerce. And our subscriptions and membership portfolio tends to have the brands in them that have paywall: New Yorker, Wired, Vanity Fair, Bon Appetit, and I can't remember what Ben's pot. Yeah. So we are a real, it's a portfolio, it's large. And my job is to sit within the global product and technology organization to basically simplify all the services. We're in the process of migration and merging and consolidation, as well as actually transforming the customer experience. Like, how do you design services? Vogue at the moment is a real spaghetti soup. So one of our big initiatives is to kind of bring it under one house. Not the content, 100% not the content, but the structure by which that content is published, so that it's easier for us to scale, as well as move into new monetization areas, so commerce, without it being just, here's another shop, like a really nice intersection of content curation and commerce. And I'm one of the few in Europe. I mean, I obviously don't have a European accent, and then I'll go into how I got there. But I think that probably the reason I got there, it was a bit of luck with that question, and there was not a role when I started. So I don't know how to describe, how you get a kind of dream job when it just sort of fell on your lap. But I'd actually kind of say it didn't, which is kind of the thing, right? Which is every single element of tapestry of thing that I did in my career kind of led me to an ability to be able to pitch work that I could do. Because when we're doing a lot of hiring, it's really hard to find people that can do content and delivery, right? It's not the same as e-commerce, not the same as building big platform capabilities, right? So, in my previous role in commerce, I would not have really hired publishing people. That's kind of my role, just looking after brands, running, a global team and bringing it together. How did I get there? I always jump a fence and go one side to the other. So my background is creative. I don't come from an engineering or a business background. I trained as an artist, and I am also a bit of a traveller. So that's kind of the DNA of me as a person. My first job was actually at Lonely Planet. So I'm a bit, as my previous boss would call me, a method product manager. I really live and breathe the product. I don't work well personally in companies where I can't be really passionate about the thing that we do. And so in the sectors I've tended to work in, it's either travel or it's photography or publishing, because they're the things and commerce. I mean, I landed in commerce a bit randomly, but it was for a photographic company. So, and I collected skills. If I talk to people about career, it's never a linear path. And that's a bit of a cliche, but it's really true. I don't think I designed a 10-year plan, but I did in every one of my my stepping stones. So if I started in art, I then went back and I went into program management. When I'd done program management, I went into kind of business and running teams. When I went from teams, I kind of went back to creative. Creative, I then went back into kind of managing bigger projects. But every time I kind of made that leap, it was to do with the fact with the skill I didn't have. And I would, if I never got a job that I really wanted, I would ask why. And often I was told, well, you don't have, the experience of running a P&L. So what did I do? I went and got experience running a P&L. Then I was told I didn't get a job that I really wanted because I didn't have true commerce background. So I went off and I got true commerce background. So by the time I got to Condé, I had a really good suite of skills that just, not that they're unique, but, I don't sit on one trajectory. So I'm more of a portfolio, kind of career person. But it's allowing me to do the job that I do at scale. And I'll go back to the very first piece of advice, actually two, that my very first two bosses gave me when I started. The first one, he was the COO, and he said, I'm not going to give you a portfolio of 20 projects to manage. I was a program manager at the time. He said, I'm just going to give you one and you're going to do it well. Then I'm going to give you two, then I'm going to give you 5, and then I'm going to give you 10. So by the time you finish, you'll be able to run a program rather than a project. And he was right. I say that to my teams now, product managers. You want to run one team, then you're going to run 3, then you're going to run 10, because going from none to 15, and that happens a lot, is just destined to failure. Because my second boss was HR. He said, if you want to run a business, you need to understand human behavior and you need to understand people and what drives them. And if you want to get them working for you, I have a team of 100, right? They need to believe in what you're talking about. They need to believe that you are going to help them. You're going to give them the information they need that they can survive and thrive. And so people and structure allows you to be creative, if that makes sense. So they're all building blocks, and that's how it kind of got me to where I am today.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Mel. I'm sure that's going to be fascinating for people to listen to. And I did have a little wry smile when you reeled off everything you do at Condé Nast, and you went, yeah, that's kind of what I do, as if it was no big deal. Like it is a huge responsibility. And I wanted to ask you, before we sort of head towards wrapping up though, you've got this huge sort of global launch now with Vogue, which I know is a big move for the Condé Nast organization, and continued success. I'm sure that'll go exceptionally well.
I hope so. Otherwise, it'll feel weird if you listen to it. After, yeah.
But I wanted to ask you about what else is on your horizon. Is there anything else that you're thinking of a little bit down the road? Is it more art and creativity, or is there anything that we haven't mentioned today that you'd like to maybe share?
No, I think it's about doubling down and doing more, bigger and better in a creative and collaborative way. I mean, I really do hope today, like whatever, it's only a small piece of the puzzle. It's sort of huge, but not in Vogue. But I think that, personally, professionally, the one thing that I'm trying to do more and more, I kept my creative and my product far apart for a very long time because it tended to confuse people, being able to literally context switch between one meeting talking about delivery, revenue and numbers, and then flipping into another meeting talking about, the narrative of some photograph. And so, but now more and more those worlds are colliding and merging. So I think personally being able to find ways to make that better, because I think our products become better, not just because of me, but because of the way the teams work, and bringing creatives who may not be familiar with digital next to engineers, and making engineers who are not that familiar with creative understand the craft. When you do that, magic happens. My job is to join the dots, serendipity, like throw people, the right people in the room, put it back, you know, some of the best creative is team driven. So it's my job, and I want to do it at scale with the full depth and breadth of our teams in around the world, which sort of sadly, not sadly, in an ironic way, I've done most of this from my room in Madrid over the last year, which for me is the most absurd thing. And I want to meet half the people I work with, I have never met. And it's just like bizarre that I have quite intense relationships. And I hope one day that there's an ability to actually, you know, meet them face to face and maybe have a wine or a soft drink and just kind of like, wow, you know, and reflect on our year and then think about how to do something better relative to climate change and everything else that's going on. This year's been a wake-up call, you know, but finding ways to do good. I don't know, is that a bit too broad?
Yeah, you know, it's amazing. You just reminded me, like I have, and I'm sure lots of people have, very close digital relationships with people now that maybe their organization has onboarded over the last year or so, and you've never actually met these people, but you do through digital to some degree, through this type of medium, feel as though you have that connection and relationship. And there's a big debate, isn't there, about whether it's ever going to be the same. It's not the same. I prefer to meet in person and digital, but it is hard to ignore at this stage that we have forged significant work relationships with people that we've never met in person, you know.
Yeah, so it goes back to then to the one thing actually then to bounce back at you, and you're right, like I started to see my teams back in London recently, and it was, aside from being amazing, different conversations were kind of created. But the thing that really fascinates me the most is algorithms, bias, and trying to bring serendipity back into the game. That's probably, I think, sitting in the back of my mind around how do you solve that conundrum? Because algorithms, I think, are a little bit dangerous. And so we have a role in kind of navigating forth with a very, very new technology.
Do you know, that's our next discussion, because I also think an awful lot around that algorithm bias and what you're feeding, and it's only the data that you have, which is inherently biased in lots of areas. And
Also past, it's not the
yeah,
future.
exactly, yeah. And I mean, I was talking back to that Visit Sweden discussion we were having earlier. You know, Ruth was sharing with me how the government has this sort of separate board who, you know, even go down to the level of trying to remove bias out of textbooks in schools, which have been there for a long time. You know, this sort of group of people, they're doing a good job. But when you bring that into scale and technology and algorithms and what you're feeding, the data that you're feeding the machines, it's a whole other topic which we don't have time for today.
No,
But
I know it's a nice end point to a
yeah,
new
it,
conversation, but they are inherently
yeah,
biased. So
yeah, yeah.
I don't know if you can. There's a great documentary on Netflix about it called Coded Bias, but you know, seeing them in action is really interesting because they're only as good as the inputs. Like I said in my talk, right? Like outcomes are only as good as the inputs that go in, right? The things you feed it, like making a cake, right? You don't put in good ingredients, you know, you don't mix it up right, you're still going to get a shit cake, right?
Well,
One
listen, the ingredients that you guys are putting in at Condé Nast continue to taste wonderful. We love the outputs, we love the content. It truly is a world class organization. The storytelling is significantly head and shoulders above a lot of content that's out there. And I loved your sort of anecdote about people who actually do reserve time to go to the park to read the New Yorker and prefer maybe that sort of slightly longer form article, you know. And then the flip side of that, people that just want that instant snackable content right now, this second, and are moving in a different way. So yeah, addressing that global audience, continued success with everything that you're doing, Mel. It's always fascinating to talk to you. I really do enjoy it.
Thank you so much. It was really lovely for you to invite me today. I
Well,
really enjoyed
listen,
it.
it's my pleasure, Mel. And I do want to say that sort of brings us towards the end of today's show. Obviously, with Mel McVeigh, the Vice President of Product Commerce and Consumer Brands at Condé Nast. Please make sure that if you're watching this or listening to this, that you tune in again to listen to the next VistaTalks show, where once again we will look to have interesting topics with interesting people from all around the world. Thank you a million. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.